Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. Tom Luongo is back. Tom, welcome back.
Thank you, Payman. It's good to see you.
I take it you've been busy considering the state of the world.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, you could say that. It's every day is it's funny actually. Before we get started, for someone who tries to pride himself on trying to stay one step ahead of what's going on in the world, because that's kind of what my partner Dexter White and I kind of pride ourselves on. I can tell you, like, it's getting very hard for us to figure out what's going on. And one of the themes that we really need to touch on, I think all of us need to touch on, is that none of us have a crystal ball, and that the pace at which things are happening and the ability to map second and third order effects of whatever's happening on a daily basis is probably a bad idea. And none of us have any idea, really any clue as to what's going to happen next. I think trying to think that we can map downstream effects of things that are, honestly, we have so much bad data. We have Trump, who's mercurial on the best of days. And, right now, like, I don't know about you, but I it's funny. I just think I never felt like more ignorant of where things are going than I ever have before. So right now we're just kind of in, scenario spinning department to try and figure out what could possibly lay out so that people have some idea of what could be coming next, because none of us have a crystal ball. I don't think anybody does. So,
yeah, I feel the same way, but every once in a while I look up at the sky just to make sure there's no Russian nukes coming down on Vancouver.
now I don't think I think that's a very low order of probability. I really, really do. But I also know that Trump likes to talk, and he likes to do things. At times he does things, in a way that is counterintuitive to the way things are normally done. I know it's freaking Martin Armstrong out. I talked to him about this last week, and it's a high stakes game that everybody's playing right now. And Trump's playing it on multiple fronts at the same time, and I hope that he doesn't think that he can treat the Russians the way he treated the Iranians, and in many ways the way he's kind of treating the Israelis. Because the Russians are different, they're built differently, and I hope he understands that. And I hope that, at the end of the day, that whatever his big art of the deal, Zopa, WWE thing that he likes to do, I don't know. I just hope that he knows when to back off when that strategy is not working to achieve the goals that he wants to achieve, which is end the war in Ukraine, keep the nukes from flying, back NATO down, and keep the United States out of any long form commitment to the process, other than rebuilding and drawing up new borders and all the rest of it. But he's got a very, very tall task ahead of him, especially with the way he's framed everything in the last 4 days. So we'll see.
So the first question I have, I want to segue what you said into the actual question, which is, it seems like Trump has transitioned from the first 3 months was America first. Now it's neoconservative with Lindsey Graham. That's a question. But to segue into that, you think that this Ukraine drone strike on the Russian strategic bombers was just a complete escalation, or am I misreading that?
No, it was, but I don't think it was the United States that was really involved in it. I mean, look, this is my problem with all of this. When I say something like that, I know that gets people's hackles up, because, there's Tom going out and, trying to defend the undefendable, yada, yada, yada. Like, I don't see it that way. What I see is, remember, I don't see any of our institutions. I don't care if it's the CIA, the DOD, the State Department, any of the think tanks, whatnot. None of them are monoliths. And we have this desire to simplify everything to, a simple through line narrative. And the U.S. is doing X, Y, and Z. Well, the U.S. is a lot of different factions all fighting amongst themselves right now. And a lot of them are fighting for their very lives. And so it becomes that's a bad take. I mean, just to make it like blunt, it's like blaming everything on the fact that, the Israelis run the country. No, it doesn't work that way. Someone wants you to believe that, And yes, they have plenty of influence. But, as I posted on Twitter this morning, somebody was like complaining about Zionists. I'm like, dude, there's more Christian Zionists in the world than there are Jewish Zionists, because there's more Christians than there are Jews. Like, there's 18 million Jews in the world. There's more than 18 million Christian Zionists in the heartland of America that were gaslit by the Schofield Bible 150 years ago, which is where all this stuff comes from. So, like, back it all out a little bit, and let's start putting some nuance on these discussions so that we can then better map what the range of possibilities and what everybody's decision space is going forward, and not to turn everything into a clickbait, or I'm going to take this guy down because he says he's an expert, or, and it's just basic ego trips. And I'm like, I'm not interested in the ego trip. Like, I'm interested in trying to figure out what the hell's happening, right? Because I don't want my daughter nuked. I don't want to be nuked. You don't want to be nuked. And so anybody like running a lot of those arguments or giving credence to those arguments is literally carrying water for the people who are trying to threaten us with nuclear fire to keep them from going broke, which is what this is all about. It's all about old colonial Europe trying to defend itself from going broke after having controlled the world for 1,000 years. That's what this is about. That's what this is. If you want a simple narrative, that's the narrative. Right? If you want a simple agenda and set of the game board, that's the game of chess. That's the one game of chess that's happening right now that trumps all the others, all puns intended, right? There are many games of chess being played right now, and don't get caught conflating one board with another board. If I have to use that metaphor, I'd prefer to look at it as a multiplayer, miasma of suck, and everybody's just playing all their assets in whatever order they can. So that's where my head is. So Trump having to give the neocons their due here or there, or allow Lindsey Graham to appear to be controlling foreign policy, is similar to what he did with John Bolton. When he was trying to negotiate, with North Korea, and then Bolton, blew up those talks in Hanoi against his will, and he was angry, and there was nothing he could do about it, because he wasn't in a position to be able to do anything about it. Today, I think I think what he's doing now is a much more high level set of messages, the messaging, which is, look, he's trying to frame this as Europe's war. He's trying to frame this as Biden's war. He's trying to frame this as somebody else's war. He's trying to stop it. He's at the same time telling the Russians, we need to have a way of coming down from the brink of this. So if you're, and that's a really tough read, because everybody is, everybody's endocrine system gets, on edge, and we all get worried about when Trump says things like, I'm escalating and moving nuclear submarines into, off the coast of Russia, and they're, moving their subs off the coast of Cuba. But that's not the way these things ever tend to work out. I would be I would be remiss if I didn't say that, every time I'm not sure what I think is going on, I check Joaquin Flores' Telegram feed over at New Resistance, and invariably I'm like, whatever I'm struggling with, Joaquin just sees right through to the through line. I'm like, oh yeah, that's clearly what's going on. And that's all of this is just a lot of high stakes rhetoric in order to both force the moment to its crisis, and then also discredit the people who forced us into this situation. Sometimes Trump goes along with the flow in order to give people exactly what they want. And then when they get what they want, they realize that they're not very happy anyway. I give you Benjamin Netanyahu and all of the neocons in the 12-day war. No one was happy with that outcome. Not the British influence within the Iranian government, not the British influence within the Israeli government, not the British influence and the Zionist influence within our own government. No one was happy with the fact that we wound up with exactly what I said was going to happen, or what I hoped for, which was a tie and a lot of injuries. Where Israel struck first, degraded Iran's ability to strike back. Iran had such overwhelming potential to strike back that whatever crippled version of the strike back that they threw was enough to really punch Israel in the mouth, and everybody depleted all of their high value military assets. And now neither of them can actually sustain a war. And Trump is sitting back going, yeah, and you're not doing regime change either. Because, I mean, are the mullahs still in charge? Yeah. Is the IRGC command mostly still in effect? Yeah. Is it a problem for the future? Is it solved? No. Is it solved for 2025? Yes. And then let's solve another problem in 2025, Russia, Ukraine. How are you going to do that? It's a much higher stakes game than Israel and Iran. Israel and Iran was easy. Get the two kids who want to fight, let them fight. Ukraine is all about the 1,000-year colonialist project that is Europe, or 500-year, or whatever. Put a number on how old that thing is. I don't care. And that's a much tougher solve because the problem is embedded that much deeper. And it's actually hitting a lot more powerful people right in the mouth. And so you have to expect them to strike back. You have to expect Trump to take some lumps and maybe even some losses. It's not how he loses that matters. It's how he turns losses around. You know, Putin's made mistakes over the years, and he's turned them to eventually he learned from his mistakes and then turned it into a strategic advantage somewhere else. Like he trusted Angela Merkel. It nearly cost him his country. And he's, but he's still dealing with the consequences of that mistake today. Right. So, here we are.
Can you explain that for the audience? How did he trust her and how did it cost him?
Well, go back to 2014, 2015, go back to the days after the coup on the Maidan, right? Where Merkel and Macron were, showing up to do diplomacy to get Minsk and Minsk II agreed to. And Merkel basically told, Putin, like, look, we're trying to end the conflict. Right? We're trying to freeze the conflict so that, and then we're going to sell you gas and we're going to give you Nord Stream 2 and everything else. And then, but this is the best solve. And then we're going to work on our end to like fix Ukraine and get them to stand down and everything else. And that's what she sold him. And then she comes out right before the war, or just after the war started back in 2022. Oh, it was after the war started in 2022. Said, no, we just used Minsk II as a means by which to freeze the conflict so that Ukraine wouldn't lose, so that we could rearm them, so that we could attack Russia later. But Putin and Merkel always had a relatively cordial relationship because it was always in Russia's strategic plan, and she used this against him to get Germany on his side. He was, for years, had been building relationships with with German industrialists. It's a good relationship with Gerhard Schroeder, which is how Nord Stream 2 even got built, right? So Putin, in Putin's mind, the way to stop the war from happening in the future is to stitch the world together with pipelines. If you stitch the world together with pipelines, then everybody's dependent upon each other for energy, which is how their economies run, and everybody will. And his almost naivete said, well, if we do that, then that'll lower the probability that there will ever be a long-term conflict. And he underestimated just how much Europeans hate Russians and how important it is for their long-term plans to subjugate humanity. That never changed. And so in some ways, he ignored history of the last 300 years in the hopes that this group of leaders understood that this was all just complete and utter craziness. And I think that he was outplayed by, the former KGB agent was outplayed by the former Stasi agent. And it happens. And now here we are. And, but he's got a complicated mess over in Russia. We've got complicated mess in the United States. The EU clearly has what they want. NATO has what they want. They have their agenda. Everybody has their agendas, and they're all clashing. And they're all playing cards behind the scenes, and they're all twisting arms. And, you have to expect that when the stakes are this high. When push comes to shove, like if you've ever been at the table where you've been playing this like long game of, I don't know, diplomacy or Dune or this, that, or anything else. And everybody's singularly focused on winning. And everybody is like really committed to not allowing somebody else to win. Like when you watch 6 or 7 people sitting around a gaming table, all fighting like hell to win a game. And I have seen some of the worst behavior come out of my people, including myself, in order to stop that from occurring, in order to let the game go one more turn until I get a chance to take the win, go for the win or whatever, or have my plots within plots and my plans within plans. When you watch it at the 6 and 7 person level at the gaming table, forget it. At the geopolitical level, it's exactly the same behavior. So why wouldn't you expect them to fight like hell with all of our lives? Let's say, because they don't care about us. The people who put us in this position don't care about us, and they'll use the leaders at the table who do care about their people, and they'll see that as a strategic weakness, and they'll use it. So Putin cares about his people, but he's willing to sacrifice some of them. Trump cares about his people and is not really willing to sacrifice anybody. But Macron doesn't care about France. Merkel and Merz and everybody else don't care about Germany. Kaja Kallas doesn't care about Estonia. Keir Starmer is actively trying to destroy Little Britain. Mark Carney doesn't care about Canadians or Little England. Mark Carney does not care about Canadians. Like, he doesn't care about any of these people. So those vampires, those disgusting, evil people, these are the same people that gave us that infected the world with a bioweapon 5 years ago and shut the world economy down in the hopes that everybody would die because they don't want to pay the pensions of the boomers that they promised, they promised a gravy train to.
Tom,
like, that's the people feeling. Like, there's gonna be. I don't have a good. My point payment is I don't have a good answer for you about what's actually going on behind the scenes right now. But I don't think Trump has turned into a different person unless he's literally been killed and replaced with a body double.
No. This was a good answer, Tom. I'm just going to explore it further. You said in the simplest of terms, colonial Europe is bankrupt. Are they bankrupt because this is what happens with empire, or is this because they deindustrialize and financialize their economy?
They financialize the economy and they strip it. Right. Their model is a simple colonialist model. The best way to look at them is as locusts. They just go in and wipe the place clean and destroy it, and then take all the wealth. In this case, eat all the wealth. And locusts to eat everything, and then they move on to the next target. If you back out over the last 30 or 40 years of history, it was pretty clear that the goal was to create a political power center and an institutional power center through money, finance, the control over global capital, the flows of global capital in Europe, strip mine the United States, send the wealth of the United States to China, invest in China, build it up, and then get regulatory and oligarchic capture of the Chinese government there, and then take them over. Locust out the United States, locust plague the United States, which they only about 75% succeeded at, and then move the money over to China. And then that money that they moved over to China, they would then break down the CCP, take control of it for all intents and purposes. And then, that was their plan there. They tried it with Russia. They got stymied by Putin. Bill Browder and Magnitsky and Berezovsky and all that stuff that Martin Armstrong and others have talked about for years. Right. And if you don't understand that story, like, you need to, and I would recommend everybody watch, Andrei Nekrasov's movie about Magnitsky, and, just do some basic research into what happened in the 1990s. The forecaster with the profile of Martin Armstrong goes into a lot of this stuff as well. Epstein is tied into all of this stuff. Like, it's all there. The Clintons, all of it. Bob Rubin, everybody. They're all a part of this. But the great arc of history that they had architected was to then move the money into China. What happened in 2013? Well, the Chinese oligarchs, the heads of the old Chinese money and political power recognized what was happening, and they handpicked a Chinese patriot Xi Jinping and hardliner Xi Jinping, a true believer, to run the country and to stop it in the same way that Yeltsin picked a Russian patriot in the name of Vladimir Putin to stop what was happening in Russia. And so once Xi came to power, and then we touched off, and this is what, 2012, 2013, right? All of that stuff. And then what happens in 2013? You have a push for Syria, right? To blow up Syria, which results in, and Putin gets involved in Syria to stop the NATO invasion by brokering the deal that says Assad must give up his chemical weapons, which he didn't have. Those chemical weapons were like our Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. For the most part, we know where those chemical weapons came from. They came from the British, and that, you know, the chemical weapons attack there was a false flag, owned and operated and run by the British in order to justify Obama and company bringing a coalition that willing to blow up Syria. Putin negotiated that out, stopped that from happening. His reward for that was the coup in the Maidan 6 months later in Ukraine, or 4 months later in the fall of Yanukovych, along with the trade deal and the EU accession of Ukraine and all of that stuff. Like it's all tied together, but it's because Xi was now consolidating control in China. Putin had to step in 2014 and 2015 to stop all of this crap from happening. That's why he moves into Syria in October of 2015 after the JCPOA is signed. It's why he had to green light the resistance in the Donbass and support the resistance in the Donbass and take Crimea. You know, however you want to, you know, for whatever version of the value of the word take you want to believe. If you want to believe that the election was fair and, you know, was fair and honest, great. I happen to. My partner Dexter White thinks it was a military takeover by the Russians. Like we've been arguing about it for 11 years now. Whatever, I don't care. Like, you believe what you know, it doesn't matter. The Russians de facto, they own Crimea, period. And but understand all of that. Xi in that period of time was fortifying China and putting the system in place that he has now, and is now, over the last 4 or 5 years, what has he been doing? He never opened up his capital account. Mitt Romney and everybody ran on this whole idea of turning China into a currency manipulator because they wouldn't open up their capital account, which is nonsense. It's typical neocon, you know, expansionist nonsense. And what did he do when things started to roll over? When, you know, things got bad, you know, during and after COVID, what did he do? When Chinese, you know, investment companies went bankrupt and property companies like Evergrande and Arcos Capital and all these things went bankrupt, he put the European money at the back of the line to get made whole, meaning they got their wealth stolen because they didn't get paid $1 back, or £1, or a euro. Not one. He paid all the Chinese investors off first. He put the foreign investors at the back of the line. They got nothing. Capital accounts still closed. And George Soros is out there calling him the devil like three days later. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's the way this works. So that's why China never opened up their capital account, because they were always intending to steal the money, because they knew what these people were trying to do. They have a long memory. They remember the Opium Wars. They remember what the British did to them, you know, in the past. This is nothing new. And so Russia resisted, the Chinese resisted, but the Americans were still the wild card. And then in 2016, we had both Brexit and the first Trump administration, the first Trump election, and that was the big shake. And they had to get that ring fence because they needed to have control over City of London for the capital flows and to maintain control over the value of the dollar through LIBOR. And they had to make sure that Donald Trump wasn't able to do anything. And they had to accelerate the process of destroying the United States from within. That's my story. And that's the way I view the last 15 years of the world. And you know, I think it's been pretty predictive of where we're going.
That's a good story. And I love the way that you framed everything. But one thing doesn't make sense. So their whole plan was to destroy America, take the money to China, but like they've lost China now. So do they even have a plan at this point?
Yeah, which just threatened everybody with nuclear fire. What do you do when you have no other moves? You flip the game board. So they're still trying. Their plan is to still try and outlast Trump and bind him down, and then try and pick this same game up tomorrow, meaning 2029, after he's gone from power. That's what they're trying to do. Their game plan now is simply just to undermine Trump and to get his coalition to fracture and to hate him. And so every little thing that Donald Trump does, and here's the thing, and I said this last year. All last year, I was expecting during the campaign, I was expecting them to use Trump's staunch support of Israel against him. I said it on 100 podcasts. I'm like, this is the obvious play for them to gin up. So they already started at post 10-7 to gin up pro-Palestinian movements all across the United States and all across Europe. The Europeans came out in favor of the Palestinians. All of a sudden, overnight, the Israelis were genocidal maniacs and everything else. It turns out that they are genocidal maniacs, right? But at the time, I felt the rhetoric was way over the top and was incredibly discordant with what was actually going on, okay? I'm not saying that the Israeli response was ever proportional or reasonable, okay? But it didn't start to move to the level of genocide until, much, much later, okay? So I stand by what I said in late 2023 and into the middle of 2024. I'm like, you're being gaslit about this. You're being allowed to be critical of Israel for the first time in 30 years or 40 years or 50 years, whatever the hell it is. Pick your number. That's part of an operation. Using maximalist language is the surest sign of an intelligence operation. So be careful with that. I'm not saying Israel's right for doing what they're doing. I'm saying what they're doing is being amplified to a particular level to get you into a heightened state of anger and resentment. And then they use that. They're going to use that against Donald Trump in the fall for the election. And I was convinced they were going to do it. And then they missed at Butler, Pennsylvania, because they were going to replace him with Nikki Haley. It was pretty obvious that that's what they were going to do, right? Two women that nobody voted for running for president. It's a perfect Davos play, right? So you've got a prime minister now nobody voted for. You've got, you know what I mean? Like, this is the way this is the way these people operate. Germany's got a chancellor that nobody really wants. Like, everybody has a government they don't really want, right? But Trump survives Butler, and then at that point, there's no way they can beat him. So they just hold all the pro-Israel stuff and keep gestating it and keep making it and keep amplifying it. Netanyahu, who always worked for these people in the first freaking place, as far as I'm concerned, if he was working for them, what would he do? He would continue to amplify how he was persecuting and killing Gazans. Strategically is what he would do. And it doesn't hurt that that's what the Israeli people want him to do, from what I can understand. Or at least that's what we've been gaslit into believing, that 90% of Israelis want all the Gazans wiped out, the Palestinians wiped out. That's what we've been led to believe. It's plausible, but I don't know, because I haven't been there. I haven't talked to, and neither has anybody else, talked to a couple of thousand Israelis to find out where they are, right? Where their head really is, as opposed to cherry picking stuff to fit a narrative. Again, not trying to absolve Israel of anything they're doing. It's clear that they've gone off the charts. And they've gone way too far. And Trump actually tried to stop it, and he can't. Because there's a limit to even what the American president can do, by the way, obviously. So when you look at it that way, it strategically makes perfect sense for them to continue doing what they're doing, because the more that Trump is trying to save Israel from itself, from its worst instincts, which is what he's doing, okay, for a variety of reasons. It's now being used as a cudgel to break his political coalition apart and to undermine everything he does and to turn him into the arch neocon. And I don't buy that. Do I buy that he has those tendencies? Sure. But when push comes to shove, at the end of the day, this guy is not, I don't believe this guy wants to, nuke the Russians and take their stuff. Like, I don't believe that. But that's the narrative we've apparently been, told we're supposed to believe this week because we all stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
So before proceeding, there's a question from the audience that's actually pertinent to what you're saying. Sure. Kanak Saram says, who is the they that's being referenced? Is it supranational money interests that have transcended nation-state boundaries? Well, who's the they?
Yeah, the they is absolutely. It's what I like to call the Davos crowd. It's the old European colonial banking interests that have, run the world for the last, well, in many ways, and run, especially, they were the first to industrialize. So they had this massive first mover advantage, right? The more you think about history, you realize that they were the first to industrialize. So they had this massive first mover advantage in so many areas. And they used that as a cudgel to colonize parts of Africa and the United States and blow, India and blow up parts of the Middle East and yada, yada, yada. So, and North Africa, and they spread like cancer around the world. And that's collapsing, but they still have power. They still have, thousands of tons of gold stashed away in banks whose names you've never heard of, managed by people you'll never see on a Wikipedia page. Okay. And so it's that. Some people call it the 12 families of Europe. Again, I don't subscribe to any one of these versions of history because I don't think it's really important at this point. I mean, it may be important for documentation purposes, but we can see who they are and we can see how they express their political power, right? And that's all that matters. And there's some of them are Italians and some of them are Spanish and some of them are Dutch and some of them are Jewish and some of them are British, some of them are French and some of them are Hungarian and whatever. They're everywhere. And over the course of the last 500, 600, 700 years of their, having, some of them are Indian, right? And some of them are Chinese. Like, you have to wrap your head around the fact that everybody that, when a colonialist power goes into a country, they work with how they do that and how you run the color revolution script, which is old as the hills, by the way. We've just given it a name in the last 40 years. Because of the rise of global media, we needed to have an image system to use to then transmit it across, the electrons of the internet, or the IP packets of the internet. But the idea of the color revolution, the basic mechanics of it are as old as the hills. Send your people in with money, start to partner with local businesses and local people who are willing to be corrupted by foreign money. Use that to then gain to then get control of the media, the narrative, the political structures and everything else, and then undermine the society from within and then take it over. It's an old system. Ian Burlingame calls it the financialist kill chain, which is as good a phrase as any. But the current popular zeitgeist is color revolution, and this is an old process. The U.S. Civil War was an attempted color revolution against the United States. That's the way I've come to see the American quote unquote Civil War, or what we here in the South like to call, as I always say, the recent unpleasantness, right? Or Lincoln's War to prevent Southern secession, whatever you want to call it. However you frame the U.S. Civil War generally says more about who you are and what you've been educated in than what actually happened, is the way I like to look at it now. But there's about 100 different ways of looking at the U.S. Civil War, and they're all valid. But the big one is that France and Britain were, egging the South on to secede and then setting the international trade table such that the South literally had good grievances against the North. But it was classic kind of narcissistic triangulation. They triangulated the North against the South, and then, backed one side. And by the way, the Russian Tsar, Nicholas II, backed the other side. That's part of the reason why they really hate the Russians. Because if, Nicholas hadn't blockaded the northern ports to stop Britain and France from resupplying from, so that to break the British blockade of resupply of the North, the South would have won the war. And the world will look a lot different. And the world will look unbelievably different today.
How do you see Russia's involvement in the Civil War? Would you see Russia as the benevolent one doing the right thing, or is it just two sides of global powers vying for?
I don't think morality comes into it. Good, bad. I don't think that matters. I think the Russian Tsar was probably looking at this from the classic perspective. Remember, this is 40 or 50. This is 50 years after Napoleon, right? Or 40 years after Napoleon. Seeing as we cannot allow these people to have a vast continent to rape and pillage, to then bring back home, to then rearm again to come after us. So we're going to stop that dead cold, and we're going to back the United States, in order to have, he was triangulating as well. Let's just, you know what I mean? So yeah, in geopolitics, there is no morality, there are only interests. And when you break the morality out, and what's everybody been trying, what have we've been gaslit into believing over the last year and a half? Let's get morality into this. Like, no, morality has nothing to do about any of this. Well, morality does play a factor here, which is in what's your end goal. If your end goal is the liberation of humanity, then who do you want running the world? Ursula von der Leyen or Donald Trump? If there's a world to be ruled, I don't think there is a world to be ruled. I think there's a country to be ruled, and I think there's an economic country. I think there are economic blocks that can be ruled. But do you want to be ruled by people who have 1,000-year history of raping and pillaging and destroying the lives of native populations around the world? Who they transferred that horrific mindset onto the United States, onto our political system, onto our ethos, and turned us into them. And that's the recent history post World War II. That's our shame, right? It's to our eternal shame. So now the question is, do you want us to make amends or not? Or do you just want to be angry that we've been douchebags for the last 75 years?
Tom, you kind of answered my question, but when do you think America went off course? Was it literally World War II, or do you think there was another crisis point?
Oh, I think it was earlier than that. I think we started going off course with Hoover getting elected in 1912, and then we get the Revolution of 1913, where we get the Federal Reserve, the income tax, direct election of senators, which is the most important of the three, by the way, because that's the one that actually broke down the real proper separation of powers. And the beauty of the American Constitution, for people who do not understand the American Constitution, and fair cop if you're Canadian. Like, I didn't understand the Canadian Constitution or the Canadian system until very recently, when I actually started studying how you guys actually are organized. I understand that the bicameral legislature was a very important part of this. That the separation of powers. It wasn't just three branches of government. It's the legislative branch. The lawmaking branch was actually split up itself into a bicameral scenario, where the people were represented by the people's house, and the Senate represented the states. And in our federal system, the states have nearly as much power as the federal government's supposed to have. Well, if you do direct election of senators, then the people are in charge of both houses of the legislature, and you break that system down. See, originally, before 1913, senators were appointed by state legislatures, and they were there to advocate for the states in the lawmaking process. And direct election of senators was probably the worst thing that could have ever happened to the United States. the more I think about it, the more I think that was the real betrayal, and that's what set us on the course that we're on today. So now we're trying to get back to some other version of that reality. And, how do you do that when you have a monetary system that has been corrupted by the imposition of a central bank? And I was talking with Caitlin Long the other day, and she brought up, the original opposition to the Fed, saying, it was a guy from Wyoming. It was the representative from Wyoming at the time. He said, "Look, I understand you're desperately trying to impose a central bank that doesn't look like the Bank of England because you're worried about the Bank of England, like that structure being imposed on the United States. But it doesn't matter. You're going to wind up there anyway." That was his argument back in 1912, 1913. And he was correct. But we wound up with the Bank of England. Then we wound up with something even worse than the Bank of England. Right. So, yes, America went off course out of hubris, pride, political, the insane amounts of political advantage that we had coming out of World War II, being the only major country that wasn't bombed back to the Stone Age. And yeah, and we've got a lot of sins to expiate here. I'm not gonna lie, right? I'm not gonna lie, but that doesn't mean and you can break the myth of America, right? The mythology of America, and that mythology is real and durable in the minds of Americans. And the question of whether or not we ever lived up to that mythology or not is a good question. It's an open question. Maybe we haven't actually ever been able to express it, because from the day after Cornwallis at Yorktown, the British and the Canadians have been trying to undermine that victory. And Canada was set up as an antipode. Canada is just Pakistan for the United States. That's all it is. I hate to break it to Canadians. I like Canadians personally. Every Canadian I've ever met, it's not even that you're all polite. You're quite grumpy, and I like Canadians. They're good. Every one of them I've ever met, I really like. But your heart's in the right place. But as a country, all the Tories who lost in the Revolutionary War, they all went to Canada. And then we were set up as an outpost to attack the fledgling United States, and the Crown was, funneling power, was funding money and power, and consolidating political power. And what is now, what I understand, is where the Laurentian elites come from, and why everything's in Ottawa and Toronto and all of that stuff. And it was done on purpose. And and that's fine. We can liberate Canada too. What Trump is arguing for, when you back out all of his crazy shit that he says on a day-to-day basis, when you back it all out, it's really obvious he wants to restore the rightful king to the throne of England, and he wants to free the Commonwealth from he wants to free the Commonwealth, and he wants to free Canada, and it's up to Canada to choose where you want to go. But the problem is that, like everything else, why do Ukrainians hate Russians? And there's probably a lot of reasons for it, but mostly it's because, the Russians did terrible things to everybody under the Soviet Union and in the past and everything else. But why do Canadians really have a seething hatred of the United States? The one thing about Canadians I don't like. Personally, you're all wonderful, but there's an undercurrent of seething hatred or I don't know. There's something there that's always been there.
I was actually
maybe you can answer that.
I was going to ask you, why is it that America rebelled against the crown, the king, but Canada didn't? And it's not just that your United Empire loyalists came here and infested this country, because even before then, there was something about Canada that was different than America.
Sure. I don't know. I mean, it's a good question, but the Western Canada, from what I understand, was all people moving up from Montana, and they're all Americans that wound up settling out west, which is why Western Canadians are different than Eastern Canadians, and in mindset, and I mean, obviously, geography and the land and the people that the land self-selects to survive out there are going to be different, right? I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know why we should have this there shouldn't be any animosity between Americans and Canadians, and I don't know, but there's a we're dicks. I'm gonna lie, like Americans are not, we're dicks. I mean, yeah, we are, but at the same time, like there's I don't know if there's an inferiority complex thing going on. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not gonna like play that game, but clearly there's been a leverage point that's been that they've been used. Canada's been used in many ways to help the crown continue to have influence over the way the United States develops. And it's, if nothing else, than just to keep it poor. And, and not get the full benefit of being America's northern neighbor. And, I don't want to be blunt, or I don't hate to be blunt or rude, but, do you really want to be America's welfare state to the northern border? Like, you know what I mean? Like, wouldn't you? I mean, Trump's blunt, and he's, it's kind of rude when he said, look, you would operate better as a state. You have so many more advantages of being states within the United States, of being territories of the United States. You adopt all of our corporate law, and the internal parental tariffs go away, and like there's so many just basic legal things that would open up the Canadian economy for Canadians, not for the power elite in Toronto and Ottawa, Montreal, but for rank and file Canadians. The benefits would be immense. And that's what he was getting at. He's just, terrible at communicating these ideas, and does so in a way that when he feels like he has to insult somebody, he does. And I sometimes I wish he didn't do that. Right. I wish he put a little bit more like pathos in his presentation. But I mean, I spent 11 days up in Calgary, and, all we talked about was how can we, frame, Albertan independence from Canada, from the East, and how can the Americans help that along? And I think the thing the other day, the announcement the other day, that Danielle Smith just went around, Ottawa, and then cut a deal for a pipeline with the United States. The beginning. I think that should be definitive for anybody who doesn't think that Danielle Smith is not on the right path, or she has the wrong people around her, or anything else. I think Danielle is absolutely. The more I watch her operate, the more I think that she's in a complicated political situation, just like Trump is, just like everybody else is, and she's trying to navigate this process without engendering an unbelievable backlash and hatred against Albertans. Like, she's trying to thread the needle. It's just a very difficult needle to thread when clearly Europe is looking at Canada as the last place to locust.
There's a related question again from Canucksaram. Would the U.S. support Alberta independence, and how would they?
I don't know, but I don't know how they would, but we obviously do. I think it's clear from what Trump has said. When I was speaking to the people up in Alberta about a lot of this stuff, what I kept telling them was that actually, you guys, you want to either argue to become your own country, which is going to be very, very difficult because you're landlocked, but better to become a territory of the United States first, because then you get to develop. And this did not go over very well at first. Everybody was like, I'm going to be a state. We deserve to be a state. We're a real country, And I'm like, stop. Think about this for a second. From a political perspective, from an American political perspective, Alberta becomes a political football immediately if you add them in as a state. Also, historically speaking, no one ever just came in and became a state. Everybody became a territory first, and then they normalized their laws, and they proved that they could organize themselves and build a proper. I know Alberta already has most of these things in place, but there's a lot of laws and whatnot that would have to be changed to comport with American law. There's just a lot of basic legal work that would have to be done. Becoming a territory gives you all the protection of the United States. So if Alberta. So if Ottawa decides they want to invade Alberta to prevent its secession, oops, sorry, we're an American protector. You want to go to war with the U.S.? And then we're into a South Park episode. You know what I mean? And you get all the benefits and none of the political nonsense. You're just a territory. No one cares about, Guam or, sadly, Puerto Rico. Politically, no one cares about any of these places. They don't matter for presidential elections. They don't have any representatives in the legislature. They get to vote their preference, but they have no voting rights, really. Okay? Because we don't have federal elections. We have 50 state elections that then send electors to Washington, D.C. to pick the president. Everybody forgets that, right? But elections for federal office, this is where we get into constitutional gray areas, and I'm not no lawyer, so I'm not going to comment beyond that. But for me, I told some of the guys up there, that I met, that I talked to, go for territory status first. You get all the benefits and none of the drawbacks. You get to normalize everything. You get to work on normalizing your legal system. You get to immediately make whatever deals you want economically. You get cross-border travel. You get all the benefits of being a state without being anybody's political football in DC. You should not want to become a state, Alberta, until Washington's actually been cleaned up a little bit, because then it's really to your advantage. Think in terms of, not in terms of ego, but in terms of strategic value to yourselves. And I think you'll see that I'm right about that. And I had to really work certain people over, for a couple of hours to really make this argument. I think it's the right way. We would absolutely welcome Alberta into the United States as a territory almost immediately. I don't even, and we, Saskatchewan, sure, absolutely. If there wanted to be some secession from British Columbia, from Vancouver, great. We'll wall it off and turn it into a John Carpenter movie. I'm good. I don't care. You know what I mean? Like Manitoba, you want everything, Manitoba's a little, but again, as territories. And then get used to the benefits of being a member of of being part of the U.S. as a legal entity, and then then decide what you want to be. But every time we've added territory, and then they became states, they're some of the most vicious battles in American history were fought over these things. Okay, who gets to come in as a slave state and who gets to come in as this state or that state. I was all, you got to break those bastards over in Europe first, so that they don't have any control over what's going on in DC. You got to clean up the DOD and all the traitorous elements within the intelligence agencies and everything else. You got to put some people behind fucking bars. You got to do all sorts of shit, and you get all that done. It's glory days for Alberta. I mean, it's just, it's a Bruce Springsteen song. Like, it's, you know what I mean? It's not that song's about anything, other than getting old, but it's actually a great day for everybody. And for us and for you, I think it's, I gush about this. I want to be able to go to Calgary whenever I want. I had a great time. I loved Calgary. The Canadian Rockies are amazing. What I saw, just all of it. I'm like, y'all are our people, and we want more of you, and but develop independently. If you want to be in your own country, mazel tov. You know what I mean? More power to you. But there are multiple options for getting all that done. From an American perspective, where we can help the most is as a territory. So,
fair enough. We got about 5 minutes left, and I think we've talked enough about this. I kind of want to shift gears. You mentioned something about the corruption of DOD. What is going on with this investigation into RussiaGate, which obviously was a complete hoax? But
right.
Do you think is this a distraction
No.
to win the 2026, or you think there will be actually indictments?
They're filing the grand jury, and they're impaneling a grand jury in the Southern District of Florida. If this was a distraction, it would be in DC. No, this is the ultimate case of, oh, by the way, y'all screwed up. You raided Mar-a-Lago. I was thinking about this morning. Actually, Tuesday mornings I have a thing I do for my patron, for my clients over at Newsmax. I have a thing I got to do for them on Tuesday mornings, and it was something I was telling them this morning. I'm like, the more I think about this, because the news broke last night, it's the ultimate case of irony. I think they raided Mar-a-Lago. I think they all thought that RussiaGate was handled. And then they got word that Trump is the one who had all of the documents that corroborate RussiaGate. And all these leaks that, oh, we found a burn bag in a vault at the CIA, or we found it over here. We found it out back behind the friggin', chemical shed or whatever. Like, oh, that's all bullshit. Trump had the documents the entire time. They raided Mar-a-Lago to get them, and they didn't get them. And once they raided Mar-a-Lago legally, we can go after them for the crimes. We can go after them for this in Florida, where we control the district courts and the federal courts. The courts in DC are hopeless. Just like the courts in New York are hopeless. Now, Florida is different. Why do you think we have a Florida AG? Why do you think there was never going to be anything other than a Florida AG? And why do you think they went after Mamdani as hard as they did? Because they were trying to get rid of the woman who was there with Trump the entire time. So I think this was on their, clearly got a game plan. I like to talk about the Gantt chart over the Microsoft project file, the Gantt chart over at Evil Corp Central over Davos. Well, Trump's got one as well, and it was written by Stephen Miller. And they're running their script. And what you're watching are counter moves, knowing what is on their docket versus what's on Davos's docket. And they're playing against each other. And this is a classic. If you've ever played any kind of board game where turn order really matters, the getting access to a particular action before your opponent is how you win, right? That's all I see right now. I just see this as a big game of like either Castles of Burgundy or Agricola or whatever, where it's like, oh my God, I have to get, it's actually in the Year of the Dragon, to be honest with you. So it's probably the best. I'm being geeky now, but I'm telling you, it's like, I've got to get to that spot. If you take that spot, my game's over. And then maybe he won't go there. Why? Because that's a better move for him. So maybe he'll not see that that's my optimal move. Maybe he'll go there instead.
Tom, I guess the question I'm asking is, are they going to get a couple of lawyers at Perkins Coie, or are we actually going to see John Brennan serve a life sentence? Like, how high is this going to go?
I think the goal is to completely and utterly discredit Obama and force Obama into a constitutional crisis, possibly even post impeachment, so that they can get him. I think Trump wants Obama. I think the way Trump wins and runs the entire table on these people is to get Obama. And I think that, I don't know that he's going to get Obama. Okay. But I think he's going to gun as hard as possible and put the fear of God into them that he's going to get Obama. And that means that by aiming high, aim small, miss small, right? The Patriot. You know what your target is. If you miss Obama, you get Brennan, you get Comey, you get Clapper. Clapper's gonna flip. He's already told everybody he's lawyered up. He's already all but admitted publicly that he did all this back in 2018 when he didn't think he was gonna, you know what I mean? Like it was ever gonna go badly for him. Clapper's gonna sing like they're all, and they're rolling everybody up from the underneath. And I think as well that they know they've got Europe dead to rights, and how you stop Europe from getting involved in this directly, because Obama's who Obama works for, clearly, is you tell them also, we have the goods on you and how you stole the 2020 presidential election, and then 40 House seats in 2022 and 2024, and at least 5 Senate seats in 2024. We have you dead to rights. We know this. We know you're all guilty over complicity over COVID and the biolabs and this, that, and everything else. And that's why I think Ursula von der Leyen rolled over. That's why I think the British press is changing their tune on certain domestic issues, but they're still trying to push Trump into, or even better, I was just thinking about this. All these stories that are out there being leaked all of a sudden that, the Brits are going to perform piracy on the high seas against Russian ships. Why would you tell anybody that? If you would just do it. But maybe what's happening is that all of this stuff is being laid out there so that people understand so that you're signaling to the people, this is what the stakes are, and this is what we're going to avoid. So that when and if Trump is able to avoid all this, I'm going to keep the if on the table here, not the when, the if. He's going to look even better. He's going to have even more political power than he had before. Because he will have taken us to the brink. Maybe he made some mistakes along the way, but he was able to navigate a very complicated and difficult situation. And we've got a year before the midterms. It's a lifetime.
Well, Tom, I hope you're right, because we need some good news, because in Canada, all we're getting is bad news.
I know. The way he handled Mark Carney, though, I think is perfect. He has to do this. He's doing this to the Swiss too, because the Swiss have rolled over to these people. So, watch Keir Starmer very carefully in the UK. I think Starmer is the fulcrum that's the angle that I think they're pushing the hardest. They're trying to get rid of Starmer, and they're trying to provoke a
the guy is more spineless than he's more spineless than Justin Trudeau was. Like, he just looks like a neutered Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, that's saying something. I would have that to me, that would have been an unbreakable password at some point. Neutered Justin Trudeau, like, that's redundant.
Ending it on a funny note. All right, one quick question from the audience. Closing question for Luongo: favorite board game and/or TTRPG?
I can give that's easy. My favorite board game is Brass Birmingham, and my favorite tabletop RPG is Torg Eternity. The version of Torg Eternity, the latest one, excellent. Both great games.
I would have never figured out what TT stood for. Tabletop. All right.
I know. I'm a geek.
Tom, I'm a computer nerd. I play video games, but Tom, where can the audience follow you or learn more about you?
Sure. The best place to go is to start at TFL1728 on X or Twitter. You can sign up at the Patreon at Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns. You can get there through the blog, which has a repository of the newsletter, announcements, and/or all the podcasts that we put out. I run a podcast, the Gold Goats and Guns podcast, where I try not to saturate the world with just 4 or 5 of them a month, but I want them to be high signal, low noise. But you can go there. There's a sign up for Patreon over there as well. Just that's the gig. So,
well, Tom, thank you very much for making time, carving out time from your busy schedule to come on here. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, and I apologize that it took this long to get this done. It's been a bit of a crazy summer, because I know you and I have been trying to get this together since Calgary. So, maybe we can. The next time you want to do this, I'll make sure that I prioritize it to make sure that we get to do it. In something like 3 months. So,
well, either way, I appreciate you making time. So, thank you very much. Have a nice day, and goodbye to the audience.
Take care now. Thank you.